welcome to this edition of Border Report Live. My name is Rudy Mireles, and I am your host here in Harlingen, Texas, in Deep South Texas, in the Rio Grande Valley. And joining me a little later is our South Texas correspondent, Sandra Sanchez, who's going to be bringing in a very special guest, Dr. Austin Kocher, professor at the Newhouse School of Public Communications at Syracuse University. But we wanted to start today with something that's been making headlines today when it comes to the topic of the border, and that was today at the White House. Border Czar Tom Homan told reporters millions of asylum seekers end up with an order of removal, and he called many of them asylum cheaters, not asylum seekers. He said 9 out of 10 asylum seekers are actually removed from the U.S. And in regard to the ICE raids that we've been telling you about across the country over the last month and a half or so, Homan said ICE is only enforcing the laws that were enacted by Congress.
We're not making this up. ICE is enforcing laws enacted by Congress. I see all these people protesting ICE. Why aren't they protesting the Hill? If they don't like what ICE doing, protest the people who wrote the bill. I see members of Congress comparing us to racists and members of terrorist organizations. If we're terrorists for enforcing immigration law, what's that make them? They wrote the law. We're enforcing laws enacted by Congress, and we're going to do it. Now, the first thing I do every morning, I look at the data here every day for the last 24 hours. And here's what the data told me this morning. 70% of everybody arrested is a criminal. Hard stop, 70%. Who's the other 30% we're arresting? National security threats. For instance, over 300 Iranian nationals. We arrest national security threats by the thousands since President Trump's been in Oval Office. Who else is that 30%? People who are final orders of deportation. People who had due process at great taxpayer expense were ordered removed by an immigration judge. Our job is to remove them. There's also gang members.
And you heard there the border czar Tom Homan talking at the White House, talking about some hard data, and what a perfect segue into our guest today, Sandra.
Yeah, thanks, Rudy. We have Dr. Austin Kocher. He is professor at the Newhouse School of Public Communications at Syracuse University, a fellow at the Immigration Lab and the Center for Latin American Latino Studies at American University in Washington, D.C. That's my alma mater, and former researcher for Transactional Records Access Clearinghouse, or TRAC. He also has a Substack channel and does regular podcast called Substack Live. Welcome, Dr. Kocher. It's great to have you here.
You again.
Yeah, you actually came to the Valley a couple years ago, and we got to actually meet face to face after years of me calling you and bugging you and trying to get you to help me. You were always willing to help me try to decipher some of this data. You know, right off the top, we played that quote from Tom Homan talking about 70% people arrested are criminals. You know, I know I've seen several Substack Live channel sessions that you've written about, you've talked about, and I don't think that you believe that's true. He says they dig into the hard data. That's what it is. What do you say in response to what you just heard?
Sure. So it's true that the Immigration and Customs Enforcement has built a series of dashboards where they can look at activity across the country on a regular basis. It would be great if the public also had access to that data to verify and validate what Mr. Homan is saying. That would be great. We've asked for that. I've asked for that. Others, they haven't been transparent about that, but he certainly has made those claims on the news. Look, here's what we know about people in detention, and here's what we know about the arrest data over the last 6 months. He's not wrong in saying that around 70% cumulatively, at least for the first couple months, included people who have criminal convictions or criminal charges. I don't think it's reasonable in the American justice system to describe people who only have charges as, quote, criminals. We still are mostly a country that should be innocent until proven guilty, but be that as it may, that was a number that was roughly true up until about 2 months ago. However, based on data from the Deportation Data Project, we know with absolute certainty that the main spike in arrests over the past 45 days or so have been almost exclusively due to increased arrests of people with no other criminal history of any kind, whether it's a charge or a conviction. I know that I've seen claims from this administration that people without criminal histories include national terrorist threats and national security threats. I think, you know, having looked at this data for the past 10 or 15 years now altogether, there's always a lot of politics that get played in terms of how the data is represented. The truth is, there probably are some rare, but some national security threats in that other immigration category. What the is not saying is the other side of that story, which is there are thousands and thousands of people who have a criminal conviction that in no way reflect a public safety threat, a national security threat. We're talking very low level misdemeanor charges and convictions that and so again, that story that the administration is telling, there are parts of it which reflect a sliver of reality, but the whole narrative I don't think matches up very well to what the data says comprehensively.
I know as a journalist trying to wait for the monthly data from U.S. Customs and Border Protection and then analyzing it, kind of going down these different rabbit holes you can plug and play, but sometimes, depending, we've noticed if the data is favorable to whatever administration's putting it out, they'll put it out earlier, or, what news cycle they put it out on, or, if it's Friday at 5 p.m. or 6 p.m. Eastern time, it means they didn't really have a good month in their opinion, and so they kind of bury it. You're saying that they're not really releasing all the data that they should.
That's right. So folks like myself who do this kind of research on a regular basis, we've often, for research purposes, are sending in public records requests asking for the data. We've also, many of us in this field have, encouraged administrations, both Democrats and Republicans, publicly to say, look, just proactively release this data. One of the issues is, again, this is Democrats and Republicans. This is the Biden administration and the Trump administration. They often fight the public in court at great taxpayer expense and at great expense to researchers and organizations, fighting to not have to release this data. Fortunately, we very often, as FOIA requesters and litigators, do win in court because judges look at the arguments and they know that these records belong in the public domain, anonymized, of course, so we can't see who this is not, it doesn't compromise people's privacy and confidentiality. But this administration is not releasing that data. Groups are still having to go to court and fight to get it. And that, again, as a researcher who's been doing this work under both the Democrats and Republicans, I just see a lot of consistency there. And I try to do my work, like many researchers, without political favor or partisan interest. We're just trying to understand what the trends are. And it'd be great if the Trump administration could live up to its promise of being the most transparent administration in history and proactively release this data.
You're saying we welcome the data. We have the computer systems that can accommodate this. Bring it on.
Yes, absolutely.
Some data that we do know is that detention numbers for immigrants, it's approaching 60,000 nationwide, right? You write that additional funds from, in your Substack, you wrote that, quote, it's exploded in the past 5 months. And you say that additional funds from Congress will continue this trend. So in your opinion, what's feeding this trend? ICE arrests, asylum denials. I mean, what is the data showing you? Why are we up to this number?
Absolutely. ICE is just doing so much more enforcement activity than they have in a very long time. So there are more ICE agents out on the streets making arrests, putting people into detention. They have to go somewhere. And then legislation from Congress, like the Lake and Riley Act, as well as decisions by ICE attorneys, immigration judges, and the agency itself, is reducing the number of people who would normally be released on bond or released some other way back into the community, especially while they have their court proceedings still active. So, for instance, Mr. Homan made a claim about the criminal history of folks. One of the things he did not mention is that one of the main growth areas of ICE arrest over the past 2 months has been immigrants who have pending immigration court proceedings. So they're arresting people who still haven't had their full day in court and haven't yet had an order from an immigration judge. I have heard a number floated that 80 or 90% of immigrants seeking asylum don't get it and get deported. Actually, for those who make it to court until recently, that number was higher. So between 30 and 50% typically immigration, asylum seekers who make it to in front of an immigration judge actually do get asylum on the merits of their case. Now, the fact that there have been many more asylum denials in the past few months is due to administration policy, not necessarily changes in the quality of asylum cases. Again, we have a problem right now, and we do have a problem in our country, I would say, across the political spectrum, trying to represent all immigrants as perfect and good and saintly, or all immigrants as criminals, terrorists, and national security threats. The reality is in the middle. And in fact, a lot of people who come do win asylum on the merits. They're not necessarily all cheating the system. Yes, there is fraud in the asylum system. And yes, there are people who, don't really have as strong of cases. But again, many of those cases don't make it, and people don't win. And the laws do allow ICE to arrest and deport those people. He's right. The laws are written in that way. But again, I would say it's not just about the laws on the books, as Mr. Homan was representing. It's also the administration chooses to enforce those laws. And I think there's growing public sentiment that the way in which they're enforcing the laws is generating some criticism and concern.
Let's try to use some of this data. I'm going to put you on the spot. So
Sure.
Detention numbers, are you able to break those down, say majority male, minority female, over a certain age, Hispanic, unaccompanied children? What are you seeing trends? What are you seeing as far as detentions right now?
Yeah, absolutely. So the data that we get from ICE on a biweekly basis required by Congress, doesn't have every category we'd like to see. So we don't have nationality, we don't have unaccompanied children, but we do have overall trends. So the number of people in detention has doubled since the start of this administration. And although there's more people across criminal and non-criminal categories, the area of growth that we've seen the most is among people without those criminal histories. So as I said, with the ICE arrest data that's fueling detention, it's also showing up in the data in detention that, again, almost a third of people in detention now don't have any criminal history whatsoever, not even the charge. As far as the other breakdowns go, again, can't really speak to that because they're not proactively releasing data with all of those characteristics, but it's certainly true that people are in detention today who wouldn't have been in detention a year ago. Many of them have pending cases, and as we've seen, many of those people who are detained are being put on flights out of the country preemptively, even before their cases are all the way finished.
All right. Thank you so much, Austin. If you could just stick around with us, we're going to take a quick break, and we'd love to bring you in and continue this conversation. And for those of you at home, stay with us. Border Report Live is back in 1 minute. And welcome back to Border Report Live on this Wednesday afternoon. My name is Rudy Mireles, and I am your host for today's program. And joining us today is Dr. Austin Kocher, professor at the Newhouse School of Public Communications at Syracuse University.
Dr. Kocher, we were talking earlier about deportations, detentions. I want to switch subjects slightly to GPS monitoring, like ankle monitor devices. I know you've written a lot of reports over the years on this. The Washington Post recently says that ankle monitors are going to be expanded by the Trump administration. You've been tracking the different types of alternatives to detention programs. Tell us about them and tell us what the trends are now.
Certainly. So what ICE refers to as alternatives to detention, even in their own language, they say it's actually not an alternative to detention in the sense that it would replace civil immigrant detention. Rather, it's much more of an expansion of monitoring and surveillance of immigrants in the country under the agency's priorities, being able to track people. The agency currently uses a few different types of devices to do electronic monitoring. Many people will be familiar with the black box, the GPS ankle monitor that people are required to wear around their ankle. That comes from the criminal legal system and was imported into the civil immigration system with some controversy about whether or not that should be used for civil violators as opposed to criminal. But there's the GPS ankle monitor. There are the smartphones that run what's called SmartLink, which is a smartphone app that does electronic monitoring using facial recognition. There's a smartwatch, and then there's also a telephonic reporting mechanism. So since 2004, when ICE's electronic monitoring program was created, the biggest change that we've seen is a major transition during the Trump and Biden administrations from GPS ankle monitors to smartphone usage, partly because the smartphones just allow for so much more sophisticated communication, support, making sure that immigrants get to court, and two-way communication with deportation officers, which the previous administration and the data shows was actually quite effective. There was over 99% compliance for immigrants who were in alternatives detention under the last administration. This administration, partly due to misrepresentations about that smartphone app, there was a lot of false representations of that as if the administration was giving away smartphons to immigrants.
I remember that, yeah.
Like it was a Verizon store or something, which it was not. It was a part of, a semi-punitive monitoring program. Well, partly because of that criticism, this administration is backing away from smartphone usage, and they really want to expand GPS ankle monitors, which they will. Now, here's the issue. The data shows, when we've seen the data shift just a little bit, and I'm sure we'll see this in the coming 2 or 3 years. I'm sure that Congress's expansion of ICE funding is going to make it possible to have a lot more GPS ankle monitoring. The issue is, until recently, there's been really a max of around 30,000 people on GPS ankle monitors. A lot of these ankle monitors were built years and years ago by the private contractor that does this. And so that contractor is going to have to ramp up production in these. And I think it'll be a question right now as to how quickly and whether or not they'll be able to do that. But we're very likely to see that expand dramatically.
I remember going to migrant shelters and talking to people. They do not like having the ankle monitors on. They're cumbersome. They're uncomfortable, they told me. They worry when they take showers. And they like the smartphone, but like you said, there was some misperceptions about the smartphone. Just to clear it up, you couldn't use it to look up how to get to your favorite restaurant. It allowed you to contact with your ICE officer, gave you a calendar. I told you when you had a court date, and then an ICE officer, you could take a picture and send it and say, I am here. I'm in St. Louis where I'm supposed to be, for instance, right? It had limited capabilities, but I don't think it was perceived that way. I think people thought everyone was getting a new iPhone or something.
Yeah, that's right. And it really boils down. This is something that's like, this is a concept that will, I think, help everyone understand the different philosophies behind this system. There's two models of how to think about humanitarian migration. One is a case management model, which Immigration and Customs Enforcement under the Biden administration moved slightly towards, which is basically immigrants are coming to the country. They should have a chance to follow the law and file any humanitarian claims that they have, such as asylum. And if they don't succeed, they should be deported. Let's not forget that the Biden administration deported 250,000 people in this last year in office, which was larger than any year of the Trump administration. So it's not as if they weren't deporting people; they were just treating it like a case manager program. This administration, somewhat like parts of the Obama administration and the first Trump administration, is definitely viewing it as a punitive system to make it harder to add the social stigma and simply to make the whole process more difficult so that people will either not succeed or will simply give up and leave the country. So we're seeing an underlying shift in philosophy that's then shaping all of these other programs, like the trend towards ankle monitors instead of sticking with smartphones.
And the Washington Post is reporting that the program could now cost $500,000 per day to monitor. You know, I did do some data myself. So I looked up some. There are like 160,000 on SmartLink, and it costs $152,000 per day. 20,000 on ankle monitors now at $55,000 per day. But the Post is saying that's going to ramp up, and that'll be $500,000 per day. So you know, it is a bit costly, right?
Yeah, absolutely. GPS ankle monitors cost $3.71 per person per day. And
you know the data.
I do. And the smartphone app costs 96 cents per person per day. So it's multiples more than the smartphone app, with quite likely lower success and lower quality of support for people who are here trying to follow the laws. Let's just remember that people who have those ankle monitors on, it's not because they are criminals or because they're in the criminal system. Very many of them are simply waiting for their court date. That said, there are people in the ATD program on the GPS ankle monitors who already have a deportation order but haven't left the country yet. So those are the two main groups: people with pending cases and people who are have a deportation order but haven't left the country.
Okay. Well, I think we're going to take a quick break, but when we come back, I want to talk about the immigration court cases and backlogs, and you've been tracking that. So stick with us. We'll be back in 1 minute.
Welcome back to Border Report Live. My name is Rudy Mireles. I'm your host. That is Sandra Sanchez. To my right and to my left there is our guest for today, Dr. Austin Kocher.
Yeah, we've talked detention, we've talked ankle monitoring. I want to talk about immigration court case backlogs. Your previous employer with Syracuse University Transactional Records Access Clearinghouse tracks the immigration court cases. They're reporting that in June, the cases were at 3.4 million. Now, that is down from a record high of 3.7 million, which was in 2024, right? So why did cases go down? Was it rocket dockets? And is this trend going to continue when we are actually losing immigration judges? What's your data take on all this?
Sure. I mean, it's really unprecedented. The backlog in immigration court has grown tremendously. I remember when it was 300,000 cases, 400,000 cases, and we thought that was just out of control and astonishing. So when it started to get very close to 4 million cases, that puts a lot of pressure on judges and on the system. It's driven partly by enforcement, partly by the fact that there is a lot of instability in the world, and there are growing numbers of asylum seekers moving around the world, including to the United States, to try to find a safe place to go, and that's driven up the numbers over time. So seeing the drop in numbers is really quite astonishing. We just haven't seen that really ever since the 1980s, certainly not as many as we've seen. And it's a little bit counterintuitive because this administration has been politicizing the courts, politicizing the immigration judges, in the sense that they have fired judges that they had just hired. They're firing judges that have been on the bench for a long time. They seem to be going after judges that take a more independent approach rather than just issue blanket denials and rubber stamp denials and rubber stamp deportation orders. So it does seem to be that they're looking for immigration judges that fit with the current, punitive vision of the immigration system. But even with fewer judges, even with all these firings, part of what they've been able to do is change the policy and the practice of the immigration court so that judges can close cases out before they ever get to their merits. They can reject asylum filings for something as simple as failing to check a box or simply failing to put not applicable in a box that's not applicable. And they've incentivized judges to really feel like they have the administration's support behind them if all they want to do is just close cases and deny cases. So they're really able to both, fire a lot of judges while also just closing tens of thousands of cases. And like I said before, we've seen asylum denials go from 50 or 60% all the way to a little bit more than 80% now, which is, again, unprecedented as far as I've been looking at data over the past, 15 years. So it's certainly, the backlog is certainly going down, and that's been something that we've been concerned about for a long time. I think the question is it going down for the right reasons? Is it going down because they're actually deciding cases on their merits and exercising judicial independence? Or is this part of a political project to make immigration impossible?
Now, we've always thought that, a court case can take upwards of 3 years to get through. Are you able to take the data and analyze now about how long a court case will take in today's world? Because it does seem like these are very expedited cases that are happening now.
Absolutely. I have not looked at the recent data in the past 2 or 3 months about how long cases are taking, but it's absolutely true that they are getting closed out much, much faster. I know from talking to a lot of immigration attorneys that they've had clients that had court dates set out for a year or 2 years just because of the volume of cases. Those cases are getting what's called recalendared, which basically means the courts are moving them up, to 4 to 6 weeks or 8 weeks, and very difficult to prepare a complex asylum case or a removal case in that time period. But they're getting moved up, and then again, many of them are getting getting rejections very quickly and getting issued deportation orders very quickly.
Before we go, I wanted to ask you about the self-deportation. Are you able to track those numbers? Is that showing up anywhere? Do we know who, how, where, and when people are self-deporting?
We don't know that. This is data that the administration could release, but some self-deportations are documented, some aren't. For instance, the administration converted what used to be called CBP-1, I know you're familiar with this at the border, into what's now CBP Home, where people where people can register their departure. They do seem to have some data on that, but it's not clear that even that data would capture the full picture of people who are choosing to leave the country. And I should say, I know it's not popular to say, I know a lot of people, I'm sure you do too, who are choosing to leave and make decisions as a family to leave rather than stay because of the current political environment.
All righty. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Dr. Kocher. That's Dr. Austin Kocher, professor at the Newhouse School of Public Communications at Syracuse University. And thank you for joining us for today's episode. You can catch more on borderreport.com. We'll see you tomorrow.